Hello, thank you for listening to 3 Legacies Recovery Recordings. If you enjoy our program, please be sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to share with a friend. We're also self-supporting, so feel free to contribute to the channel through Venmo at Recovery Recordings 615. Please note that the views expressed on this podcast are solely our individual views and do not represent any official stance of any 12-step program. We are not affiliated with any specific recovery organization, and this content should not be considered as professional advice for alcoholism or addiction.
Hey everyone, it's Paul from 3 Legacies Recovery Recording Podcast with a quick note before we get started with this episode. It's hard to believe we've been doing this for an entire year now. It's been such an amazing experience getting to know everybody. We already have the majority of 2026 booked up, and we have a lot of great guests scheduled. We don't make any money off YouTube or any of the other platforms. This podcast is completely self-supporting, and we've spent a lot of money, time, and energy into it simply just because we love doing it. We're not trying to make a profit, but we are trying to cover our upcoming expenses if that's at all possible. If you'd like to be a part of that, you can make a contribution at our Venmo, which is Recovery Recordings 615. We'd like to keep this commercial free. Thank you. Hey everyone, welcome back to 3 Legacies Recovery Recording Podcast, where we explore the ongoing journey of recovery and the spiritual growth that comes with it. Today's date is Tuesday, December 9th, 2025. This is episode 86. If you'd like to reach us, you can reach us at our email address, which is recoveryrecordings615@yahoo.com. That's plural. recoveryrecordings615@yahoo.com. You can also find us. We have a private Facebook page, 3 Legacies Recovery Recording Podcast. Get on there and send us a request. We've got some cool stuff coming up this week. This upcoming Sunday, December 14th, we have Peter M. from Florida. He's going to be joining us. We're calling the episode Deep and Effective Spiritual Experiences. Looking forward to that. Let's see. Our prayer today is that something spoken here touches someone's heart, draws them closer to the Spirit, and helps them receive strength needed to keep moving forward towards healing, hope, and renewal. And the guys that I have on the show with me tonight, we've been doing this is our second part to a 3-part series, and there's 3 guys joining me. We got David G. from Murfreesboro. How's it going, David?
I'm doing great, Paul. Good to be with you tonight.
Appreciate you, buddy. We got Jimmy D. right here in live action, right here in front of me. Jimmy?
Doing pretty good, brother. Glad to be here.
And Jared L. joining us from Brooklyn. How's it going, buddy?
Hey, guys. Thanks for having me again. Obviously, I didn't spoil it the first time.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, we for the listeners, we are doing a 3-part series. We're calling it A New Sense of Power and Direction. This is the second part. If you want to go back and check out, the first one was episode 84. It was a week ago, so it was last Tuesday. Our next one will be next Tuesday, and it was episode 84 was our first one. So go check it out. And yeah, we'd covered quite a bit on the first one. Where what really stood out to me as we were going through it was how exhausting life can be without a relationship with God. Really, I mean, it was constantly just consumed. I didn't do anything unless it helped, unless it was something I wanted to do. Pretty much, I never did anything. I never even heard about practicing a spiritual principle my whole life. Right. And maybe possibly my grandparents or someone in my life had taught to me about hope or faith or whatever, but I didn't know how to apply any of that stuff in my life. And by the time I started drinking and doing other substances, it just spiraled out of control. I was 14 whenever I started, and then I didn't come in until I was 33, and by that time it was just a freaking exhausting life. And to be honest with you, I didn't even think I wanted to be sober because I thought sobriety was like, you're just going to sit around and watch the clock tick. How do you have fun? How do you enjoy life without chemicals, without alcohol? And, so Yeah, as I was listening to you guys speak last week, that was the main, like one of the main things that stood out to me was like, man, this new sense of power and direction. It was like how exhausting life is without finding a power greater than yourself and learning how to put a daily application of spiritual principles in my everyday living. And we had spoke. We're technically we're not going through all. We may not make it all the way through our experience, a little bit of our experiences with the steps, but that's kind of the guide rails that we have. So we had talked about our first step, what it was like coming in, and then what our relationship will look like with God when we first come in, and how that shifted over the time, and then. And we talked about a little bit about some of the revelations that we had through the fourth step, and how we'd started seeing how we were responsible for a lot of this stuff, and how a lot of the actions that we'd been taking in life had been causing a lot of harms, not only in our life but in other people's lives. And we started seeing really where the stuff that was objectionable in our life, and so. Yeah, again, for the listeners, go back and listen to the first episode, and you'll get a kind of a better feel of what we're going to be talking about tonight. So, and again, that's episode 84. It was last Tuesday. David, talk to us, man. Talk to us about like your experience right after the fourth step experience, and going into 5.
All right. Well, I hear a lot of talk in the rooms about people being really reluctant to share with their sponsor the things that they wrote down in the fourth step. And, maybe this is just me being an alcoholic and being chronically obsessed with being the exception to the rule, but I was an exception to the rule. Once I finally did a fourth step that was thorough enough for my sponsor's taste, I was honestly excited to share it with him. I had been in kind of a rut in my recovery for a while, and I was going to meetings where people were talking about inventory and sharing about it a lot. And, that tends to happen, whenever I would hide out in meetings for a while instead of facing life, which it is possible to do. Meeting attendance is a very good thing, but it's also very easy to hide out in meetings instead of facing the things outside in the world that are important. And every time I would do that, the topic would be inventory. And that happened quite a bit. And so I finally finished my inventory, and at a glance at it, my sponsor deemed it acceptable. And I was glad to go through it with him. I was raised in a religious tradition that didn't necessarily mandate, but strongly encouraged confession to a priest. And I never trusted one enough to do that. I couldn't look at it as a requirement. The 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous reframed the perspective for me. It wasn't like, do this so you can avoid going to hell. It's like, hey man, you're going to drink again if you do not face these things honestly with somebody. And I was there for it, man. Real talk. I was ready to get that stuff off my chest after I suppressed my fourth step enough and it kind of vomited all that stuff onto the page. I was ready to move on with it. And my first sponsor was very understanding. He wasn't judgmental about my fifth step. It was a pretty liberating experience for me, although I'll say that sensation wasn't immediate. It was kind of over the next couple of days afterwards. Like the big book says, I felt like I could look people in the eye. And I'll tell you what, I started to really feel like I belonged in the fellowship after that point, because I realized I was among a group of people who had faced their darkness the same way that I just had. And many of these people knew each other's darkness and loved each other anyway. In fact, almost they loved each other because of it. It was a really powerful thing, getting all of that stuff off my chest. And I changed sponsors after a couple of years. And my current sponsor, he didn't want necessarily to go through the steps again with me. I told him, like, when he started working with me, I really wanted to learn about the traditions. But I also told him, before we move forward in our relationship, I would really like to do a fifth step with you. Because I felt it was probably pretty necessary for this new person to know me as entirely as possible.
Did you go back to the beginning for that reason?
So, and this is kind of has a lot of fine print, but my sponsor before him, we had been going through the Narcotics Anonymous steps. And so I had done the AA steps before. And the NA fourth step has the same sections that the AA fourth step does, but it has some additional stuff in it. It has relationship, feelings, abuse, secrets. It's got all of these specific sections in it. And it's incredibly thorough. And it will give you carpal tunnel syndrome because they write all of their steps out, and there was a whole lot of writing that went into this. And my current sponsor isn't an NA sponsor, but I had everything written out, and I wanted to share it with him because it was pretty in depth, and I didn't want to have anywhere to run.
Nice.
So,
Man, that's good stuff. When I'm taking a guy, depending on the guys, I don't really ever do most of it, any of it, like it's a cookie cutter thing, But when I'm taking a guy through the steps, specific guys that you can tell have like a lot of stuff that's happened to them in the past, or they may even express some of it to me. I may have them go back and like do a thorough one from the beginning, just so I can kind of get to know them. But it just depends, it's not really a cookie cutter thing on any of it for me. I kind of
right.
see what happens.
Well, everyone's disease and everyone's recovery doesn't look exactly the same.
Yeah.
I trust that if we invite God into the process, He tends to guide us in the right direction one way or another.
Yeah. Yeah, amen. Yeah. Jared, talk to us, buddy. Anything of that relatable?
Yeah, I mean, when I did my first, number one, that was a great share. And I get a lot of thoroughness out of the NA, the step working guide. It's like, that book came along to plug all the holes that these alcoholics were like dodging from the blue book. They didn't leave any stone unturned. But the first time, to be frank with you, to be honest, the first time I did the fifth step, like even when I was doing the fourth step, I didn't even know I was doing an inventory. I was just doing what he told me to do.
Wow.
I had no idea, like, oh, this is this. And he's like, look, you got, people, places, and things like, the resentment, list.
How
People,
long have you been
places,
sober?
And things. No, maybe 6 months.
Gotcha.
Maybe.
Yeah.
And he was just like, look, you got 2 weeks. Whatever you got in the first column, that's what you got.
Yeah.
And then I had another week and another couple of weeks, whatever. Anyway, but when I went and I sat with him, it was really powerful because the words on the page came alive when somebody else was there, and he was like really guiding me through this stuff. And I found out a lot about, how, to be frank with you, he was gentle, but not super soft with me. He's like, listen, a lot of this stuff looks like delusion. And then he just shut up. He's like,
Nice.
He's like, dude, this is all on paper. It's like, looks a lot of, he says, I'm not saying that the stuff didn't happen. I'm not saying that, but like your responses, that fourth column or whatever. He's like, brother, what are you, he's like, I bet it made sense in the moment, but that ain't it.
Yeah.
And I had to do this other thing, which was actually, but he was also like, I mean, everybody was on that list and plus my ego was still such intact that I couldn't wait to tell him how everybody had harmed me. So I was really thorough, but on accident, not because I was inviting God into my life and I wanted all this liberation. I was like, oh no, you don't understand. These people, they really still, you know, I deserve to do whatever, and that was, but was also, so I did it really thoroughly. I mean, had every political party was on there, my third grade teachers, my mom, ex-girlfriend, whatever, everybody. But he had me, he had me write out the definitions of each of the 7 deadly sins. Each one, he's like, you look it up in the dictionary, write the definition, and then you write how you commit that sin every day. I was like, I don't do those things. And then you start reading the textbook definition, like, oh my God, I do this every day. Like, and this is part of who I am. Like all of these, because, you don't know, like, what the hell is sloth, right? But that was really, honestly, that was more impactful because that was like eye-opening for me. Like, wow, like this is, it's like the sins described my natural behavior. Like, oh, this is just, how I am. And, so it was, I was thorough again on accident. But he also he wouldn't let me off the hook. He's like, look, you got 2 weeks to do this column, 2 weeks to do this one, 2 weeks to do this one. I think I did it all in like 6 weeks or 2 months or something. But as I've evolved, now when I take somebody through the work, I mean, listen, the easiest way to get rid of a sponsee is to tell them to grab a pen and a piece of paper.
Yeah.
They'll run away. All of a sudden, they're busy now. They're going to all these other meetings. They're going back to church. They join the prayer group. Doing pen and paper. We're gonna make some columns. And they thought, what kind of paper? Any kind.
Yeah.
But they what I do now, what I found to be the most effective thing is that, like, I have the guys, I have them do the 7 deadly sins because that was helpful for me.
Yeah.
But when I have them do the columns, I just have them do the first 3 columns. Then I tell them, all right, come meet me in my shop and we'll sit down we'll see what you have. Just, segregate some time. Yeah. And I have them do the 4th column right there in real time.
Nice.
As we're going through, and then when they're done, they get to see all the patterns and everything, and I can help them with that stuff. And I'm like, all right, you just did 5th step. And they're like, really? I'm like, yeah, that's it, man. I'm going to leave you here for an hour. Give me your phone, and that's it. Have a seat. I'll see you in an hour, because I ain't telling them to go home. No, they're going to go to Dunkin' Donuts. They're going to go wherever. No. You sit right there. I'll see you in an hour. I go downstairs. I smoke a cigar. I come back. And a lot of times they're changed. The Lord shows up when you're that wide open, and then you got to sit down with yourself, by yourself. Oof, my God, man, that's the first like real hug from God that most people that you get. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Wow, powerful. Yeah, I tell you what, my first one, my first experience wasn't real liberating because I'd stayed so close to my first sponsor during that. It took us a minute before we did a 5th step, right? But I'd gotten so close to the guy and I trusted him so much, and he would always open up enough with me and share some of his experiences where I just felt comfortable enough to where the majority of it he already knew about, just through conversation. And thank God for that too. Like I tell you, like I learned more about like old ideas that I had in place just through conversations with that man. Just like, oh man, I kept seeing how like I have these, these just perceptions or whatever that was getting in the way. I started seeing that they were objectionable, and Jimmy, talk to us, buddy.
Yeah, so my first 5th step I did in 2012. It was like right after I got out of rehab, and it was I didn't work all 12 steps back then. I kind of stalled out after 9. But I had done like maybe a 2.5 page 4th step. So my 5th step wasn't that overwhelming, but I actually went for shock value. I went for shock value and put like my grosser handicaps on there. I didn't put like the little stuff that like really ate away at me. I put like the obvious stuff. And that fifth step with my sponsor at the time, this was in Killeen, Texas, right outside of Fort Hood, and we were both soldiers. And what's funny is I outranked him. So I was having to open up to this guy, if you know anything about the military, that had he had been in my unit, he would have reported to me, so that was ego deflating. But I'll say, even though I wasn't super thorough on that fourth step, doing that fifth step with him, I honestly think did plant a lot of good seeds. It did change me, because then I knew I wasn't alone, even though it was my grosser handicaps, after I finished, saying it, there was no judgment from this guy. There was a lot of, yeah, me too. I've done that, and he one-upped me. I'm not going to say what he did. He told me he'd kill me if I said what he did, but, he one-upped me. And I'm like, wow, if you can put your life back together, maybe I can too. And, we did it in the W.S. Young Park in Killeen. So it was outside, and it was like mid-December. So it was a little bit cold. But he sent me on my way after I did that. And, I was supposed to do 6 and 7, but like Jared mentioned earlier, some people go to Dunkin' Donuts or whatever and screw around. I went home and took a nap. And then I took a bubble bath. I did not do 6 and 7. I told him I did, but I didn't. Now we see why I didn't make it past any of the other steps, and I didn't stay sober then. When I got sober the last time in 2018, I was itching to do my fifth step after I completed my fourth step, because I spent about 2 months writing on my fourth step, I want to say. And that was a whole composition notebook filled. And, when I met with my sponsor, he was a pastor, so I met him at his church to do my fifth step. And we met in the, I guess their dining hall. Nobody was there because it was like a Tuesday evening. They weren't having service that day or whatever. So it was just the two of us. And I read that entire composition notebook to this man. And he was pretty quiet. He didn't really give a lot of interjection during. There was a couple of times where he said, all right, you're playing victim. What's really your part in it? Talking about the fourth column. And we sat there. It was a couple of hours. It took a couple of hours to read that thing. I want to say the whole ordeal was about maybe 6 hours. And after it was done, he just looks at me. He said, well, you belong here. You're definitely an alcoholic. And then he one-upped me, and I'm like, how is this possible? You're a damn pastor, and you one-upped me, a dirty, dirty sinner. And we talked a little bit, and he said, okay, now you're going to go home and do the hour of power. And I knew this time I actually had to do 6 and 7. I had to go home and actually do it. And he gave me my set of instructions. But before I went home, I'm like, Sam, what are my character defects? He said, everything that you wrote in that fourth column is a character defect. So, he had me go home. I had to sit by myself for an hour, meditate on it, reread what I'd written in the fourth step, and then do 6 and 7 and basically just reflect and become willing to get rid of those character defects. And then I got on my hands and knees and literally said the 7-step prayer right out of the big book verbatim. And I kind of felt a void after that. Like and he warned me, he said, for the next week to 2 weeks, you're probably going to feel a little bit of a void, like you've lost part of yourself. And he was right. I felt better. I didn't feel so alone, because I'm like, now I was truly honest with somebody. Yes, they saw my grosser defects and my smaller defects that just kept building up, but I told the truth. And, I walked around and I felt like this void, but it was good. It wasn't like I was depressed. It was like, okay, who am I now? That old me, we're not that person anymore. I don't have to be that person anymore. And I asked Sam, when am I going to start feeling normal? When am I going to know who I am? And he said, well, when you finish the rest of the steps. And we did the rest of the steps. It took us, I want to say it took us a full year to do the steps, because I met him every week and I went through every one of my amends on my 8th step, and we'll get to that later. But when I was 2 years sober, that sponsor left AA for the church, and I wasn't going to follow him, so I got another sponsor, and he walked me through the steps. I had to start back from square one at 2 years sober. And it was an even slower process. We went through the big book page by page, word for word, and that took a while. And that's the way I sponsor now. I sponsor like my current sponsor sponsored me because it really helped me out. And I only did half a composition notebook this time because, I'd made a lot of amends. I'd shed some of those handicaps that I had, the character defects, but we're all human. I still had issues. And, like Jared, I did it column by column, 1 week at a time. And I want to say my 4th step with him took, about 7 weeks maybe. For all 3 lists. And so this guy threw me for a curveball when we sat down for my 5th step, because I'm expecting, oh yeah, we're going to be done in 2 hours this time or whatever. It took me a month and a half to finish my 5th step with this gentleman. It was a very interactive 5th step. My current sponsor, he can talk. And he admits he likes to hear himself talk, which in this case, it was a good thing because we sat there and dissected every single resentment that I had, every single fear that I had, every single, sex conduct, issue that I had. And we talked it out. And if I wasn't, seeing it, he would help me put it together. And I'd always thought, oh, well, you're supposed to do it in 1 day. You're supposed to do your 5th step in 1 day. If not, you're in danger of relapse. And, it took us a lot more than 1 day. I want to say we started around Thanksgiving and didn't finish until right after Christmas, maybe even into the new year. It was a while. But same thing, when I read that last piece of information off on my 4th step with him, I had to go home and do the hour of power, the same deal. Go home and reread the 4th step, make sure I didn't leave anything out, and then read how it works up to the 7th step prayer. And then if I was ready to get down on my hands and knees and say the 7th step prayer. And that was the deal with that. And I'm getting ready to go back through the steps with him again because I'm nearing 8 years sober. And I've never been through the steps in the 12 and 12. So we're going to go through the 12 and 12 this time. So I'm pretty excited for that. So I'm going to do yet another 5th step, because I know even at almost 8 years sober, I still have stuff to write down and inventory and talk about.
Wow. I think what has, I'm just sitting here listening. I'm kind of letting my inspiration guide us to the next part is how my first 2 or 3 4 steps and 5th steps that I did, I was just kind of just knocking off a little edge off the top, right? And like I'd mentioned earlier, when my first sponsor, I'd gotten familiar with sharing a lot of this stuff with him and finding out how I had, a lot of, just a lot of old ideas inside of me. But I'll tell you, it wasn't until I was probably about 5 years sober. Me and a group of guys went through the Big Book Awakening, and I highly encourage any of y'all that are familiar with that, check out the Big Book Awakening. And anyways, I did a 4th step and a 5th step through that. Man, it was just a life-changing experience. And also, I think it was probably because I'm older in age at that point, and also I had more sobriety. I had a little bit more awareness inside of me where I was able to start seeing things a little different. But what keeps standing out is how each time I go through the steps, how I have a brand new experience with it, and it's I can really start to see, like what I was mentioning earlier, the objectionables, I'd never considered when you go into that fourth column, right? I never considered what I was doing and how I was treating the other person. Never really considered them at all, to be honest with you. It was always just like what they were doing and how it made me feel, you know. And I was talking to a sponsee earlier, and we were talking about the prayer work that's in between the third and the fourth column, and it's like, and my current sponsor is real big on the prayer work, right? And it's one of those situations where, if I'm going into there's really no point. I'm going to say this: there's really no point going into a fifth step if I'm still hating on somebody severely, right? Like, what's the forgiveness process look like? So that I can see how important the prayer work. That wasn't my personal experience with it. I have had guys that I'm sponsoring that really didn't needed to do the prayer work because they just had so much bitterness, and so they were so discouraged in their heart towards like an individual, and it was a life changing for them to do the prayer work, which is. But I tell you, though, one thing I like to mention. I love how me and Katie P was going through the steps, and on the podcast. Everyone go back and check that out. Katie's freaking awesome. But she was talking about how we're prepared to look at this from an entirely different angle in the fourth column, right? And she was like, it's we're talking about looking at it through the person in column one, right? Like the way they disturbed me. This is a spiritually sick person, right? Could the person do this in column? Could the person do what they did in column 2 if they wasn't spiritually sick? No. Always the answer is no, right? I mean, and then it's like, and the way these disturbed us, which is column 3, and they like ourselves was sick too. Have I ever done anything similar to this? Or I'll be honest with you, my experience has been, like, generally speaking, I've done tenfold way worse than most of the stuff I was pissed off at people about, right? So, but it was just life changing. I started seeing, like, wow, man. I tell you, my current grand sponsor says, we either get mercy for everybody or justice for everybody. Right? It's like, he'll jump to the chase and say, what's the 2 worst things? What's the 2 worst things you ever did? Right? You don't got to share this. But what's the 2 worst things you ever did? It's like, imagine if someone just walked through life judging you based off those 2 things. And here we are walking through life, judging this individual, whoever it is, based off this, whatever it is on this column, and it's like, wow, how liberating is it to realize, like, and also you just get to see the truth, I started seeing how, man, I'm all these things I'm doing that's where that objectionable term comes from. Is like, man, there's that one line in 6 where it says, are we now ready to let God remove all these things which we have admitted are objectionable? Well, what's objectionable? Well, the fact that I'm only thinking about me 24 hours a day. The actions that come from that, and just never considered other people in so many different ways, right? And it goes back to that, the exhausted part that we were talking about earlier, about how, like, just a life ran on self is just so exhausting. David, talk to us, man. Talk to us.
Yeah, so I actually had the privilege of listening to somebody's fifth step last Sunday, and today I'm going to read it to you. No, yeah. I'm kidding. But I tell you what, man, it is so refreshing every time that I hear somebody share that kind of stuff with me. Like, how my capacity to love another human being actually increases from hearing that. I don't know if that's your experience at all, but I don't know. People become more lovable to me when I see their truly human side. When all the chips are down, all of the masks are gone. And, I get to revisit some of the stuff that I share or have shared with my sponsor, with the new people, to, like, let them know it's okay. It's not like, it's not okay leaving all of this stuff how it is without making any changes, but to let them know that they're lovable and worthwhile as human beings, how they are. One thing that I'm really big on, and I don't remember who I heard say it first, was the idea that our character defects are character defaults in truth, right? They're the patterns of behavior that we've rehearsed our entire lives. So, maybe at one time we chose these behaviors, but ultimately, we lack the awareness to not act in accordance with them. The pride, greed, lust, anger, gluttony, envy, and sloth that governed us for a long time. There's a popular book called The Four Agreements and a sequel to it called The Fifth Agreement. And in the Fifth Agreement, the author talks about how, you could look at your life as a movie, and you go into the theater and you go and watch your life, and you see everything from the point of view of one character. But if you went into somebody else's movie, you might see the same characters on the screen, but you're not going to see them portrayed the same way. In fact, you might not even recognize yourself, right? So that perspective kind of ties into steps 4 there on out, and that, everybody is operating according to their own level of awareness. And so throughout the inventory process, and as we start to get into the steps that follow it, we're granted a new sense of awareness the same way we were granted a new sense of awareness about our drinking. We start to become aware of our grosser handicaps and our sneakier ones, the ones that, we think we're getting away with on a day-to-day basis. All the little things and big things, we come into a new awareness of them rapidly, right? And one of my favorite places in the big book that talks about the removal of defects, and I think it's on page 13, is Bill says that he asked his newfound friend to remove his defects root and branch. And this is me stealing something from somebody else again, but there are certainly times where I think I'm being thorough, but in truth, I want to keep the root but just have the branch trimmed up a little bit, So the big book kind of lies to us when it says we have now completed step 7, because it's been my experience that that's a lifelong process for me, But I will say, from looking at my own defects, be it from like reading books like Drop the Rock, or doing personal inventory, or confessing my shortcomings to another person, through all of that, I've found that most of my defects of character, at least in the more obvious ways that they manifest, have diminished. There's still room for improvement in every single realm. I wrestle with intellectual pride. I wrestle with envy. Envy was a big thing on my second inventory. A lot of the people that I resented were other musicians who were more successful than me. And I didn't even realize it as I was writing it down. And as I was admitting it to my sponsor, I started seeing that pattern developing. And so, today I try to look at other ways that envy manifests itself in my life. Am I envious of the pay rate of my coworkers or the prestigiousness of their titles? Am I envious of somebody, having a good experience, or am I happy for them? Today I have the ability to be happy for them if I so choose. And that's because of steps 6 and 7, The asking God to remove our defects of character, in my experience, doesn't always remove them right away, but sometimes it removes the necessity for us to act on them. Sometimes I'm granted an extra little moment in which I can make a choice. Do I raise my voice at my kid over something small? Do I hide the fact that I'm the one who spilled cat food on the floor? And 9 times out of 10, when I'm granted that sense of awareness, I don't act on the thing. I can't say 10 times out of 10 because, God saw it fit to give me a life in which I always have something to work on. And ultimately, I know I can't remove any of those things in my own finite willpower. But, talking to other people about it makes it real for me. That's the other big thing. The other big thing is that it's all hypothetical until I tell another human being. Because I can confess it to God all day long and still try to rationalize it. But when I tell another person, all of a sudden I'm accountable, especially if that other person is an alcoholic, because that alcoholic is going to know, at least to some degree, the sickness that I'm wrestling with. And because they don't want me to drink, they're going to hold me to a higher standard. So, I mean, hopefully something came through out of all of that. I know I've been rambling on for a little bit, but I could talk about defects of character all day long. I don't know how public I want to be about some of them, but, thank God for anonymity. That's all I got.
Nice. Good stuff. Jared, talk to us, buddy.
Yeah, man, that was incredible. Thank you for sharing that. Like these defects, it takes. I don't know about you, but it took me so long to really, because initially you'd say, okay, I can say all the prayers and everything that I want and do all the formalities and read what I'm supposed to read and write what I'm supposed to write. But how do I respond when I'm not getting what I want? I'm doing all these things and stuff still isn't going my way. Now, the program is telling me, okay, how about you put in like an honest day's work, like from start to finish, and don't deviate from that. And you do that for a little while, and it's against my nature, to do something like that. And then you don't get any recognition. I'm like, what the hell am I doing this? I didn't get paid one more dollar for putting in the whole day's work than I did when I was jerking around. What am I doing this? So it just takes what I love about and I like everybody has to use language that works for them. And I love that, Paul, that you use like objectionable, because it's a severe word. Like, but in the book, they're what I hold on to is when they say, just in very basic terms, these are unusable and unsaleable goods.
Nice.
Which means just things that worked for you before that don't work anymore.
Yeah.
This used to be usable. You used to be able to tell this lie and get this result, and you would buy yourself a little bit more space to do what you want to do or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
And like, you run out of road, and then the program is like, well, why don't you try this other thing? Like, how about instead of, some people can't go from lying to telling the truth. So they go from lying to just shutting up, and that's like golden if you could do that, and then just like, it's all theory until real life shows up, where you find yourself thinking that you're making these decisions and you're still driven by self. You're still driven by, I got tricked into, this was a while ago. I remember I got tricked into, this is how I became like, what do you call it? Like, monogamous, right? Like one of my boys told me like years ago, he's like, listen, he's like, why don't you not have a backup plan? Just don't have one, just so you know what it feels like. Even if you want to pat yourself on the back for doing it, but just do it just for that. To like trick my ego into doing the right thing. And so, because I'm a results person, I want to get paid. So I do the right thing. And then guess what? This girl, she was sleeping all over the place on me. It was freaking crazy, right? The one time that I'm like, no, I'm really abandoning myself.
Yeah.
This girl, she went to 10, right? And, but the gift I got was not that I was in a loyal relationship. The gift I got was the freedom that I didn't have anything to hide. And that was like, that wasn't on the menu for me ever. Like when somebody, but it's just just that simple, move a muscle, change a thought. Like over time, you start to practice these principles, and then they become your principles, because you know what, you end up actually really getting what you want, which is you get closer to God. You get peace of mind. You get like, and you can have, obviously, nobody's perfect. So even me, I have flare ups all the time. It used to be like 90% flare up and like 10% potential. And that's why people would be around me, because they say, oh, there's something inside of him that's good. And now it's really the other way, where they're just like, wow, this guy's like the greatest guy. But periodically he turns into a little bit of an a-hole, you know? But it's not my character anymore. It's not who I am, because I've gotten paid so much from, taking these other actions and really being considerate and waving at the neighbors and just it becomes part of who you are. But initially, you don't even think it's. I didn't believe it was going to work. I didn't, but my old ways was just not working. So like, again, like we spoke about before, and I'll wrap it up, is like, all roads lead to step 3, right? So before, I go and try something new, I have to invite God in. You know what I'm saying? Because I need him in between me and the right thing. I don't need him in between me and the wrong thing. There's no God when I'm going to do the wrong thing. Don't worry, I got the wheel. But when it's me, and I need to have faith, like, I don't know where this is going to go, but I can't work in this place anymore. And I can't do this thing anymore. Like bottoming out, like a little bit at a time, finances, romances, like all the areas of your life. Over the course of 10, 20 years, you're just like, oh man, I'm like in the, the inflatable donut in the pool, and you're just like kind of paddling around. I'm like, dude, I'm living the dream right now. But it's a life that I built based on making those choices over a long period of time in all areas of my life, but one area at a time, like raising my kid, starting a good business, and then finding my wife. And then you can't do it all at once. You can't put 10 pounds of shit in a 5-pound bag. It doesn't work. But like, at least we have the roadmap, brother. Without that, without the steps, without you, without God, forget it. I'm just bumping into the wall, talking about like, yeah, it'll be different this time. And woe was me. That's all I got.
Appreciate it, man. That's awesome. I'll tell you something that just made me think of. Don P. would say, he'd say, if imagine going to a kid and telling them like, hey, like, I need you to go in there and clean up your room. Right. And, oh man, come on now. It's just how the excitement is not there. Right. He said, the 4th step and the 5th step is really exciting. He said, it's not about going in and cleaning it up. It's really about, like, imagine going in and telling your kid, now look, I want you to go in there and all the toys in there that, let's throw them away and we're going to get some new ones. It's like, wow. It's a great analogy. It's like, oh man, it's, unsellable goods, like what Jared was just talking about. We get to replace it with new stuff, new principles, whether it's something as simple as like what he was just saying, waving at the neighbor. I can relate to that, right? I can definitely relate to that, right? And, Jimmy, talk to us, buddy.
Yeah, so like a lot of my character defects that were identified during my 4th and 5th step, some of them were actually pretty surprising to me. Like, I mean, there was the obvious ones of, yeah, I'm selfish and self-seeking and dishonest, and even afraid, like a lot of the fears really weren't too surprising to me, but there were some behaviors and patterns that I had developed that I'm like, really? Defects, and they're not the grosser ones, like the more extreme ones that earned me the nickname Charlie Sheen back in the day. 'Cause I was pretty wild, man. But it was like silly stuff like I lack boundaries. I lack boundaries and I lack standards, and I don't hold true to my ideals, my highest ideals. I am a people pleaser to a fault, but I also have a temper. So being a people pleaser with a temper, I'm a strange creature, man, because I can be your best friend or I could be your worst enemy, depending on which day. But, in identifying those is like, my first sponsor, when we would meet, and we would talk, it's like, dude, you let people in. I'm like, well, isn't that what I'm supposed to be doing? Am I not supposed to be more vulnerable? It's like, no, you just take it all off. There's a such thing as healthy boundaries, and I had to learn how to develop those, because even in active addiction, I did not have those. Even when I thought I was closed off, I did not have those. And those were like some of the harder character defects for me, because I used those for 31 years, to cope, to live. Well, maybe not 31, because I got sober at 31. I used that for at least 20 some odd years, as a way to, survive to extremes. And, doing the 6 and 7, getting down on my hands and knees, saying the 6 and 7 step prayer doesn't mean that those stronger defects went away. I still have to be aware of those defects at 7.5 years sober. I'm not nearly as people pleasy as I used to be, but I can still wrestle with it. It's not crippling, but I still catch myself sometimes like, okay, why are we doing this? What's the end game here? Boundaries I've gotten a lot better at, but I feel like sometimes I swing from one pendulum to the other. I can be either really, hey, I'm cool and laid back, but the minute you cross a boundary and I have to set it, I've had to grow past another character defect of extreme defensivism, becoming dickish when I set a boundary. And I've gotten better about that over the years. I'm definitely not perfect at it. I tell my sponsees all the time when I start sponsoring them, I'm like, look, man, I am a very chill guy. I'm not the drill sergeant sponsor type, but, newcomers push boundaries. I pushed boundaries, and I had to learn the hard way when I was new, that there's a such thing as healthy boundaries, and they're good. And, I warn them, I'm like, I may sound like a prick when I set some boundaries, just warning you. Like, I will do my best not to. And I've gotten better. But there's still a lot of room for improvement, and that's what 10 and 11 are for.
David, talk to us, buddy. 8 and 9, man. Talk to us about or if there's something else you wanted to add before you go into 8 and 9. Let's talk about it.
I don't know. I don't think there's anything else I want to add. Jimmy and Jared said pretty much all the other stuff I meant to say. But no, like how we said, we're not going to go in a cookie cutter direction, and we very much are, but I love it. The steps are in order for a reason, and and I'm not a big fan of cliches, but ultimately, yeah, that statement is very true. So, we get a lot of, or at least I got a lot of my 8-step material from my 4th step, but I also found that, on the one hand, there were some people I resented that I didn't know anything to, like my 1st grade substitute teacher who yelled at me for coloring outside of the lines. I don't owe her an amends, Sorry, Miss Church, you're not going to get one. But there were plenty of people I harmed that I didn't resent too. There were plenty of people that I just harmed, and it became apparent to me when it came time to invest myself in this process that, I had done some harm that I didn't even think of in the 4th and 5th step. And, the good news is, confession doesn't stop at step 5. If it did, we'd be in a heap of trouble. So, my first sponsor and my current sponsor, helped me whenever I find a new person. They would guide me through, how I need to approach a situation. And, each one is different. There's some people there were a couple of people who are dead that I wrote letters to, and that was a very meaningful experience to me. It's don't worry, it's not necromancy. I didn't draw a pentagram on the floor and sacrifice a goat to talk to them. I wrote a simple letter, and there was another. The immense process has produced so many fruits in my life. It's hard to know where to begin, but I suppose the most significant one is in the previous episode. I talked about a girl that I had dated while I was drinking, and she had a daughter, and she drank the same way that I did, and we worked together. I don't know if I included that fact in there, but we worked together. So for a while after we split up due to our own alcoholism blowing up the relationship and me not delivering on any of the promises that I had promised to make, not being the person that I swore I would be to her, after all of that stuff, and, we're festering in our resentments, working together, not speaking at work, drinking over the fact that we're not speaking. I eventually got sober. And after a few months in recovery, when it came time to make my amends, I was at a meeting and somebody shared on, it's one of the stories in the back of the book that says to pray for the people that you resent, that they'll get the things that you want out of life. And I actually found it in myself to do that one night. And I prayed that woman and her daughter would be provided for in the way that they needed. And, they say not to get in a relationship in your first year. They say don't make any major life decisions in your first year. But they also say turn your will and your life over to the power and direction of God. So sometimes God's timing isn't exactly a year. Sometimes it's a couple of months shy of that. Sometimes it's more. But I approached her and I just said, look, I wasn't the person I should have been. You have every right to be upset with me. And she immediately, her tone changed and we were getting along, and we were apologizing for, everything that we had done wrong to one another. And before too long, we were romantically involved, and I'm sure my sponsor chain smoked over that fact, because that's one of the things that really gets people in early sobriety, is getting into a relationship. But 5 years and some change later, we're married. We have another child. We're both sober. I just turned 6 years sober. She got 5 years in June, and so that's a big one. Another major amends thing for me was, shortly before I got sober, and I was a relatively functional alcoholic for a good while. I could drink and use and still do a lot of the things that I needed to do, or at least make it look like I was doing them. And I sang in a church choir for a lot of years. And that probably, music has always been a thing where, like, even in my darkest moments when I had no faith or belief, I could muster up some faith when I was making music. God has always expressed himself to me through music, and I've always loved sharing that, sober or not sober. That's just part of my story. But I sang in the church choir for a long time, and I was going to, the director was retiring, and he wanted me to replace him. And this was a few months before I got sober, and I was showing up, and on his Sundays off, I would direct the church choir under the influence, and nobody would know. And I interviewed for the position of replacement choir director, and basically the priest made it seem like I might get the job and then hired somebody else. And I called him a hypocrite. And I really went off on this priest, who really, through discernment that he didn't even realize, because he didn't know that I was an active alcoholic. He didn't know that I was, like, doing drugs all the time. He didn't know any of that. He picked somebody else. And I called him a hypocrite and a liar and all of these things. And after I'd been sober a little while, I called him and I told him, basically that, he didn't deserve the way that I spoke to him. He didn't deserve to be incriminated for making a good decision, and he apologized back to me for how he had handled the situation, and then asked me to direct the choir for a couple of Sundays coming up. Right. So God always tends to nicely tie a bow on these presents, on these gifts that he gives us. And that same priest baptized my daughter this year, so, and it's little things like that, the amends, in my experience, give us the opportunity to show up for people.
Nice.
There were a couple of other people that I owed amends to, that the amends felt kind of hollow at the beginning because I had just kind of like gotten in contact with them by phone. But opportunities have showed up since then for me to show up for them in some capacity. And I can be a person that they rely on today, and there's no bad blood. There's no tension there. Not all of my amends have been perfect. There's one person in my life who, has accepted my amends before and then gone back on it. And that's a source of pain for me. I won't pretend that it's not. And, maybe one day that relationship will heal, and maybe one day it won't. It's not up for me to decide, but I can also sleep at night knowing that I've done my best to clean up my side of the street. So that's all I got on that. Thanks.
Nice. Good stuff, man. Jared, talk to us, buddy.
Hey guys, yeah, that was incredible. Yeah, for me, the best thing I ever heard about an 8-step list is, I forgot where I heard it, one of these speaker tapes. He said that the sponsor told him, make a list of everybody you know, and we'll figure out how you messed with them. And I thought that was funny. Because yeah, we touch everybody, right? Yeah, absolutely. But all right, for me, a couple of things I'll say, and I'll try and be quick. Is I tell the story every time I talk about the 8-step. It's very important. It's just my experience. I had to. My sponsor also made me make the columns. I guess like easy, medium, hard, whatever. And yeah. And then you got to watch where you put that stuff. I was living with somebody at the time, and she found the list, and she was like, how come I'm on the easy list and this girl is on the hard list? Yeah. And, yeah, so you gotta be mindful of where you put that stuff. So I have to put that out there because it really happens. All right, so a couple of things. The new freedom and the new happiness, right? And how do we get that? How did I get that? I made the list and I made it. Whatever was there, I put it down. And my sponsor was like, dude, you are not going on to step 10 until every one of these are done. So first 3, let's go. And that was it. He was like really, really, really by the book. This guy, super enthusiastic. Now as you're around for a little while, you're like, hey, easy does it. But no, he was by the book. So anyway, point is that as we were going through the list, and I went through with him, and he's like, all right, this person, yes, this person, no, this person, no, this person, no. That kind of stuff. Motives, obviously, with ex-partners, girlfriends, whatever you want to call them. But he's like, listen, the truth is this. You are tied to every one of these interactions. And until you make it right, you are going to stay tied to them.
Wow.
But once you do, like, the reality is that the new freedom and the new happiness, you don't have to take this person's calls anymore. If they're not a healthy person for you to be around, if you're outgrowing them, if you're operating on a different plane than them, there was a lot of dirtballs on the list. It wasn't just family members. It was people that I harmed.
Yeah.
And he's like, you're going to take back control of your life. And that gave me the enthusiasm to go and clean some of the stuff up, because it's like, listen, whatever it takes for me to make it right, with you. I'm going to make it right with you. And then I could walk away. I don't have to hide. I don't have to run away. I can just walk away. And that was like really like empowering. It felt like I was cutting these balloons and they were just like flying away, you know? And that was impactful for me. And it doesn't say that in the literature. So most of my experience is like, all right, I did this stuff and this is what happened to me, you know, because the book never tells you what's going to happen. So that was really impactful because I got to clean up a lot of the people in my life that I just wasn't aligned with anymore, you know, but I was still tethered to them by a harm that I did. The other thing is that when I made some of these amends, you know, I got the opportunity to give the ultimate act of love, right? Is for me is to give somebody what I wanted my whole life, which is validation, that their feelings matter, that they matter, and that I was wrong. And like the amount of times that amends, like that I got that response from them, like, oh my God, thank you, you know, for that they count. That no, they're not crazy. It was me and this and that and whatever. Like, you know, that's the biggest gift that you can give to somebody, to say, no, like that validation. You're right. You matter. Your feelings matter.
Wow.
And, you know, I was all the way wrong. And I didn't realize that that's what I was looking for my whole life, in the bottle, in the packages, in the women and whatever. I just wanted to matter.
Wow.
You know?
Yeah.
And you give that to somebody, brother. Oh my goodness. Come on, man. God is like, he's like, there you go. That's why I sent you here.
Nice,
you know,
dude.
that you can touch somebody else like that.
Yeah.
And let them know that, dude, I'm here because of God.
Yeah.
I'm not here, like, I don't do the thing where I'm here because I'm trying to get sober, trying to get off the drugs, and AA says I got to do this. No, I'm here because something is wrong on my spirit.
Yeah.
It's on me, and I can't shake it. I've wronged you, you know. And what does a big bro say, man? I have a great sadness, right? Woof.
Yeah.
Every time he says that, oh my God, Scott, forget it. I want to take my headphones off. I can't even take it, because that's what it is.
Yeah.
The great sadness, and I believe I've harmed you, you know. But that's the truth. That you give that to somebody.
Wow.
My goodness, you'll fly through that list. And guess what? He's right. A lot of it does. Some of it don't go good, and that's okay. They're allowed to be who they are in whatever response or no. I have people that I've reached out to from that very first list that still 3 or 4 times they still wouldn't meet with me. They wouldn't message me on Facebook, wouldn't take my calls, nothing. You know, and all they did was be good to me, and I kicked them around a little bit. And so some things you don't get to clear up, but you just got to learn how to live with it. And periodically it comes through and it pains me a little bit, and it's a good reminder, like, hey man, I know you've been around a little while, but you know, there's more work to be done. So that's what I got.
Wow. Wow, man. I love that. Wow. Tied down, man. Jimmy, talk to us. Is there anything that stands out as far as like after an amends is made with someone, that relationship has just progressively improved?
Oh yeah. And what's funny is that one person is somebody I swore I would never make amends to.
Yeah.
So like when I did my 8-step, you know, there were people that were on my resentment list on that 8-step because I did cause harm. I was a character without character. Like if I thought you were screwing me over, I was going to come back after you in some way, shape, or form and try to mess you over. And this person, me and him actually got into a physical altercation the last night I took a drink. It was the reason why I got sober. It was bad. We almost killed each other. And I did not talk to him for the first 3 years I was sober, because that was one on my 8-step that when we came to the 9th step, my sponsor was like, you need to pray for the willingness to at least forgive him. You know, because I held on to that resentment for a while, you know, just because I did the steps more thorough this time around in 2018. did not mean that I was willing to make some of the amends, because there was some stuff that had to stay living amends for a while, and living amends are some of the hardest ones to make. And I had to say the resentment prayer from 552 for this individual quite often. And this person is a very close family member of mine. He raised me. And I just would not be in the same room with him, for the first 3 years. And then, so kind of jumping ahead, like my 10 steps a lot in early recovery were written. If something bugged me, I would write it down and take it to my sponsor because I didn't want to relapse. So I would do many 4 steps all the time. Every couple of weeks, I was taking something on paper, and this person always made those 10 steps. And then when I was 3 years sober, I started softening up a little bit. I started really, getting into some 10 and 11 step work and kind of growing spiritually. I had gotten into this author named Emmett Fox, who had gone into 7 main aspects of God, and love being one of those aspects. And saying those prayers, revolving around love, changed me. It helped change me. It was a supplement to my recovery. And I know when my grandmother asked if I would be in the same room as my dad, when I went to visit them, I said, yes, I'm cool with it now. And, he was in my 3rd column, not making a face-to-face amend to, that, and like, just as soon as that, I changed a little bit because I'd opened up and let God work through me instead of trying to go against the grain and go with my ego and go with my fear. I allowed him to make his amend to me because he straightened his life out too. And I made my amend to him because, God knows I was not the best son, and I definitely did a lot of harm to him that, there's a reason why our relationship came to a head. But I talk to him once a week now. I probably have the best relationship with my dad since I've had, since I was probably 15, 16 years old.
Yeah. Is he in AA?
What's that?
Is he in AA?
No, I don't think he's one of us.
Gotcha.
He was definitely a problem drinker, but he's got some health issues that he was taking some medication for, and that doesn't mix well with booze.
Yeah.
But he's straightened out.
Nice.
He was able to seek help through getting off a lot of those meds and going to therapy.
Nice.
But we have a better relationship now, and he'll even talk to me about how much AA has changed me for the better. And he was one of those people that said, "Man, I used to judge the hell out of AA until I saw what it did for you, and now I know it worked because he knows what I came from." But yeah, like we have a great relationship now, and it was funny because that was an amend that I swore I would never make.
Yeah.
And then there's like a lot of other like amends that I want to make, that I've approached people, because my sponsor said, we don't apologize. We own up to our mistakes and that's what we can do to make them right. Yeah. Now, if they ask for me to say, I'm sorry, I will. But, there's an Army buddy of mine. I'm like, dude, I really screwed you over, man. I let you down. What can I do to make it right? And you know what he said? You just keep doing what you're doing, man. You're living a great life now. I'm proud of you. We're good. And I'm like, what? I got to do something. And I found out that that's the way they work sometimes. So it's stuff like those that, really are profound to me. I know I've had a couple of people that didn't accept my amends. And, I too have somebody on my 8th step that I haven't seen them in 15 years. And I've tried to reach out to them every time I've done an 8th step. And to no avail, they don't want to hear from me. And that's okay, because I did do harm to them. But now it's just cleaning off my side of the street.
Nice. Yeah. Good stuff. We're doing these episodes. We're making them an hour and a half, and we are an hour and 15 minutes in. So let's just end this with some final thoughts, and we'll start with Dave. Dave.
Bold of you to assume that I have thoughts. Gosh, we've covered a whole lot of ground tonight. We really got into like some thick stuff, some meat and potatoes of the program, and I gotta say, I really needed this conversation tonight, guys.
Same here.
I don't really know where to begin other than and I'm so grateful that we can share about these things publicly. I'm so glad that I'm not a person who's just drowning in secrets anymore.
Yeah.
I'm glad I'm a person and I'm among people who can take accountability. It's kind of similar to what I said about the last conversation, but that's still the train I'm on, man. Because I need to look back periodically at where I was and how I was before my life was saved, and how I was throughout the process of my life being saved. One of my favorite things about Alcoholics Anonymous is that it takes us through stuff that, a lot of people never have to go through. But in the process, it gives us permission to be human. It awakens us to the divine within us, and at the same time gives us permission and encourages us to be as fully human as we can possibly be. And in our humanness, we're granted a little bit more of a glimpse of that divine light emanating from the great meeting in the sky. I'm really grateful today, number one, to not be governed by a drink of alcohol, and number two, to not be governed by these patterns of behavior. Number three, to not be bound to not be in debt to people today, other than a couple of medical bills that I need to take care of, and I will take care of them. There's not much I owe another human being. I gotta say, I had no idea how suffocated I was living for so long until I learned that I can breathe and that it's okay to breathe. I hope that made sense. I'm sincerely grateful for the opportunity to be on the podcast tonight, Paul. That's all I got. Thanks.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks, man. Good stuff. Jared, also, you had mentioned, for the listeners, Jared has his own sober podcast. Jared, go ahead and plug that real quick, buddy.
All right. Thank you. Thanks for having me at my show, our show. It's called The Sober Experience. It's on all podcast platforms, on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, everywhere. Yeah, we've been going for a couple of years, and it's been helping people out, so I appreciate that.
Nice.
But thanks for letting me share that.
Yeah, man.
As far as tonight, I think it's just to hear other people's experiences and that we can share them. It's like, well, how do I evolve from that? I mean, a lot of times, even when I was going and making these amends, I was taught that, like, I'm there for apologizing and trying to make right things that they know about and things that they don't know about. And I don't need to be spilling everything all over the table. Most of the time, the reason why my relationships were bad was because of my attitudes, my actions, and my behaviors. And that's what I've been working on, and I'm willing to do whatever to clear that with you. Like, a lot of times, that's how most of my amends really started going. There's some specific stuff like, I chased my dad with a butcher knife when I was 14, but, whatever. That I had to say sorry specifically for that. But I think the evolution of, like, what I learned from that, and then as I kept going along, was like spirituality and really living this life. It's like, who do I become? And the measure of that is, how easy do I make it for other people to apologize to me? When other people are finally ready in whatever capacity, like, how easy am I on them? How much of a break am I going to give somebody else? That's really where like another big gift that you can give somebody else. I'm not saying like, oh no, don't worry about it with nothing. Like, no, I appreciate that you acknowledge that. Thank you.
Yeah.
And it's all good. Don't you worry about it. Like, instead of like, yeah, I've been waiting for you to knock on my door because of whatever. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But it's like through spiritual evolution, when you turn into that person, it's like the whole program and this whole life is just about love. And it's just about loving the next person, whoever that is in front of you, in whatever healthy capacity that is. And like, so that's what I do now. I say, okay, how easy is it for somebody to say sorry to me? You know, that's how I know how spiritual I'm being for the day.
Hey, man.
That's what I got.
That's good stuff. Cool. Jimmy, talk to us, buddy.
Yeah, man, I'm glad we did this. Like I enjoyed the first episode we did. I really enjoyed this episode because every time I'm gathered with a group of people that are doing the deal, I always see that I'm not alone, and two, it's like, you know, peeling back layers of the onion is about like, man, you know, I've come a long way, but I'm still learning, and I feel like I've learned from everybody tonight, you know, and I've seen some things that I'm like, man, I've grown past a lot of things, and there's some things that I'm like, man, you know, smaller things that I still need to work on, and you know, when I was out running and gunning, I would have, you know, beat myself up about that. Now I can kind of get excited about it. You know, it's like some things, some growth opportunities are pretty scary, but you know, I've noticed since I've done those and taken the leap of faith and relied on my higher power, and you know, talked with other alcoholics, worked with a sponsor, worked with sponsees, that I can do it. You know, as long as I'm doing the right thing and trusting my higher power. You know, I'm just glad to be here, and I'm glad we're doing something like this, because like when I was trying to get sober, it is discussions like these that I would hear on podcasts that made me want to come back to the rooms, and I hope that somebody out there listens to this and has the same idea that we've inspired them to come to the rooms and get help.
Nice. Yeah, I like that. I tell you, the next time we get together, we're going to be talking about, you know, what you know, someone looks like as a recovered alcoholic, what their daily life looks like as far as walking through life. And I was just reading, this is off at page 85 in the big book, and it says, much has already been said about receiving strength, inspiration, and direction from him who has all knowledge and power. If we have carefully followed directions, we have begun to sense the flow of his spirit into us. To some extent, we become God conscious. We have begun to develop this vital sixth sense, you know. And I tell you, I love Scott always says that, you know, the word vital is big, right? It's like, how important is that word? Well, you need your vital organs to survive, right? And but we must go forth, or we must go further, and that means more action. And that's what we'll be talking about on the next episode. I love how what Jimmy just talked about with like just giving someone hope that may be out there, even if they're just like a week or maybe they maybe not sober at all, or maybe they're sober for just a few months or even 10 or 20 years, you know, and it's got out of the thing, you know. Yeah, so this has just been, I love doing stuff like this, man. I tell you, this has been like the highlight of, I don't know, just the podcast in general, just meeting so many different people and having wonderful conversations with people, all the people around the world that have messaged and just said, you know, I love this, I love that, you know, it's helped me in so many different ways. I've gotten connected. Me and Jared got connected right after I started the podcast. Me and Jared connected right after that, and we stay in touch with each other. And yeah, so for the listeners, again, this is part 2 of a 3-part series. We're calling this A New Sense of Power and Direction. And next week, which is going to be Tuesday, I think it's Tuesday the 16th is going to be our final episode, and we'll be talking about, you know, what it looks like to be walking through life with having had a spiritual awakening as a result of this process we've been talking about. And and how much life looks, how different life looks today versus that hopeless person that I came in, only considering myself, never thinking about anybody else, all the damaged relationships I'd been living in. Not just on the physical realm. I mean, sure, like life, the cost of doing business, my physical, like everything on the physical was just tore apart. But that emotional life, that stability that I found through seeking a relationship with the power, sufficient power that's completely sufficient, right? And how, if you really look at that new sense of power and direction, it really comes from that, like learning that you have to seek outside of yourself, and what we've been talking about is just different ways of deflating, the self that gets us into this power. So this new sense of power and direction. So I want to thank everyone for joining us, and thank you guys, and I hope you guys have a wonderful evening.
Thanks a lot. I appreciate it.
Yes, sir.
Thanks, guys.
Hello. Thank you for listening to 3 Legacies Recovery Recordings. If you enjoy our program, please be sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to share with a friend. We're also self-supporting, so feel free to contribute to the channel through Venmo at Recovery Recordings 615. Please note that the views expressed on this podcast are solely our individual views and do not represent any official stance of any 12-step program. We are not affiliated with any specific recovery organization, and this content should not be considered as professional advice for alcoholism or addiction.